Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. So we'll just give you a second. Everybody ready? My name is Greazel, and I work with John at Iowa State University. And we're here to talk to you today about taxonomy.
I'm John VanDyk. I'm from Iowa State University, and this is a beginner track presentation. So if you're here and you know what like term load multiple is, like you shouldn't be here because you're not going to learn anything. This is very basic, so nothing is, no question is too basic here.
Yeah. So what we'd like to do, we're thinking that since there's the opportunity that we could go around the room really quick, and if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us how you're, why you're interested in taxonomy and what kind of brought you to the session today. So let's start with Rachel.
I'm Rachel Cleveland. I work here at UNI. I kind of fell backwards into Drupal, so I missed a lot of the beginners stuff, even though I'm working on things that aren't beginner anymore. So I'm kind of trying to catch up with some of these sessions.
Good. Glad you're here. Valerie?
My name is Valerie Elman. I am a student here at UNI. I am just barely getting started with Drupal, and this is a good place to start, so that's why I'm here.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Ash Krishnan with the state of Iowa, the office of the CIO, and I work mostly from the end of sort of managing how the Drupal installations go for our different agencies. And kind of putting together a plan for how do we manage that. So I'm just looking at, I'm new to Drupal too, so it's kind of, I don't do it from the developer end of things, but it's nice to know what the context is of what we're doing. So this is an interesting session to be in.
Great.
Hi, I'm Michelle Boyd. I'm with the State of Iowa Department of Administrative Services Procurement. We just did a major rollout with Drupal. I was at camp last year. This is my second camp. I am the content manager for us, but we need to still fix some things as far as taxonomy and some user-friendly things, and so this intrigues me.
Great.
My name is Tyler. I'm with Scott County, and we launched our new Drupal site next.
No, it's yay!
Yeah. The fourth deadline.
I'm John Greer, and I'm here because I'm with you guys. I'm Tony Dillon Hanson, and I work for Hyper in the morning, and I help manage about 3 quarters of the site right now in Drupal. Just want to brush up on my taxonomy ideas. And yes, I'm kind of part of your thing.
Awesome.
Brian Emery, I work for UNI, and with 3 sessions, it's all kind of
Let's see it too.
I'm Melissa Kilo. I graduated in May from UNI, and I was in a professional writing program. It got me into a lot of things concerning information and trying to find it and how to explain it to others. So I'm just like seeing what else the company is doing and learning to solve that.
Great.
I'm Untitled Chapter. I work here at UNI in the Community Education Department, and I was kind of thrown into Drupal and currently maintain our current site, and we're in the process of redevelopment, I guess, all in one. I'm trying to learn the basics.
All right, well, that's great. That sounds like the kind of people that we want to talk to.
Yes. So we're going to be very, what we want to do is actually really help educate you on this. And if there is a question that you have during this presentation, please ask us. I think either one of us are more than happy to do that. And we just want it to be a very comfortable session for you. So feel free to ask along the way. So with that, we'll get started.
Yeah, I've got just a little exercise for us to start out. I have an object here in my hand, and I'd like people to just call out words that describe the object.
Carrot.
Healthy.
Baby carrot.
Processed carrot.
All right, that was a great example of open tagging. Now just on a lark, let's try closed tagging, okay?
Okay.
I'd like you to just describe this object that I have my,
Describe it.
yeah, just give a term,
A term or terms or sentence.
just a word that describes it.
Orange.
No. Anybody else?
I'm scared.
Vegetable.
You just said no to us.
So that's
like
just
no.
a real quick exercise of the difference between open tagging and closed tagging. Closed tagging, you can only go with what I'm thinking about, what I've read. And that'll come out during the so,
You're looking at my face like I'm going.
Yeah. She's
Ah,
scared.
go in the
She's
back
scared.
Who's
row.
going to remember what the difference between open and closed is?
Yeah.
All right, taxonomy is the categorization of content. Whether your site is big or small, you need a way for people to sort and sift through all of the content that you have. And one of the eye-openers for me was the keynote yesterday, when she said, like, there's 800,000 pages of content on a Microsoft site that are just sitting out there that nobody can even find. You don't want your site to be like that. So taxonomy is a tool to basically take your content and make it sane.
Yes.
So tagging is what we just did. It's basically associating some sort of keyword with content. If you use a content management system that is not Drupal, you will often see terms like category or keyword. Drupal uses very specific terminology. And unfortunately, it seems to change that terminology with each release. But we are going here with the Drupal 7 terminology, because that's what most people are implementing. And what we would say is that we are associating content with terms.
Sorry.
And there's lots and lots of different terms to describe stuff. Like we just came up with, what, 5 or 6 terms for one little carrot, right? So this is an example of different things that some people might enter tags on. And just right off the bat, I'd like to point out a couple of things. The first one is that we have plurals and singulars together. Nobody has said at the outset, like, we're just going to make the decision that we're going to use the word cucumber, not cucumbers, so that we don't end up with a cucumber and any cucumbers, and half the stuff is tagged plural and half isn't. Anything else that you notice about this that might be a little off?
Direction.
What's that?
Yeah, direction. One and versus other potential to describe.
So this stuff is mixed together. Okay?
Keyword.
That is an error.
Yeah, that doesn't have the keyword. Or
So this thing here is not a rash. Somebody has miscategorized this piece of content. Very common occurrence. So Anne's going to start out with just kind of walking through like the core Drupal taxonomy module, what it is, what it does, how it works.
So we'll just go through step by step. Essentially, taxonomy is something that's available to you right out of the box with Drupal. So when you open your Drupal site, I'm sorry. If you wanted to just get that going for your site, all you really have to do is go to modules and look at the core module list and find taxonomy. And what you're going to find is that taxonomy is already selected and it's on. So taxonomy is enabled even, okay? So the next step is to actually, I'm going to go back a second. click that configure button. So all the way to the right, you'll see a button that's called configure. And when you click configure, you're going to get to another screen where you can add terms. So what you're seeing here is a vocabulary that's named tags that already comes with Drupal, and a spot that you can list the terms and add terms. So we're going to select add term, just because if you selected list terms, there won't be any, because it's an empty vocabulary when it comes out of the box. So you want to add terms to the vocabulary tags. So I went ahead and clicked add term, and I'm going to go ahead and add the term beans, is what I put in there. I've done that for all of these different vegetables. So carrots, ginger, okra, and onions. Okay? I think ginger's actually spice. I don't know where it's categorized, but I've added several terms to my list. And now, what I'm going to show you is how to get those terms from that vocabulary to a point that it's actually useful for you, right? Because now I have this vocabulary list, I've put terms in it, but where is it? And how do I use it? How do I tag my content with these terms? Because when I go to basic page, and I go to create a basic page, I don't see anything that says anything about tags or terms, nothing, right? My fields are title and body. So what you need to do is go to structure and content types. And once you select content types, Drupal out of the box will give you article and basic page. Okay? And if you've been to some sessions, I know that Tess Flynn did one yesterday on content types. You can learn how to add content types, so you might want to watch that if you haven't seen that yet. That will help you with the idea of content types. But for today, we're just going to talk about basic page. So in order to add a taxonomy vocabulary, you need to go to Manage Fields. Okay?
Now, one of the questions you might want to ask is why? Like,
Right.
why would you want
Right.
to do this? Why wouldn't you just want to create another field in your content type instead of doing what we're doing with taking a taxonomy? That's because what taxonomy is built for is to have a set of terms in a vocabulary and then have that set apply across different content types. So like on some of our websites, we have like a content type called people. And the job of that content type is to describe a person, right? And we have the basic page on our content management system as well. So what we want to do is we want to add that same vocabulary to the people content type and the page content type, so that when users tag those, they're pulling from the same pool of terms across multiple content types. That way, when I'm doing a search and I want to find all of the content on the site that is related to, in my case, since I work with the entomology department, monarch butterflies, I go for monarch butterflies and I get not only the page that describes monarch butterflies' life cycle, but also the person who does research in monarch butterflies. Different content type, both tagged with the same term. That's the big power of taxonomy, is it takes all your different content types and it provides you a way to link them all together by tagging them with the same term from the same vocabulary. So that's why we're doing this.
And that happens a lot, I think, from where you said you're coming from here today, with what we deal with too is research and news articles, right? So you might have certain researchers that are tagged by their project or whatever they're studying, as well as the latest news articles that have come out in that regard. So it's a nice way to have multiple pieces of content be displayed.
Now, is it an issue, though, when you talked about earlier about plurals and singulars, when you start doing that, or am I jumping ahead?
We'll be talking about that in the future. Yes, no, that's a great question, and I'm glad you're thinking that way already. So please, yeah, keep thinking about that.
Okay.
So like John said, what we need to do is be able to add this across various content types. So we're going to add a field to basic page by selecting that, where did I go? Oh, add a new field, and we're going to call it tags, because that's what we know our vocabulary as, right? And we're going to go to the drop down that says term reference for the selection. So it says select a field type. We're going to select term reference. So now I selected term reference, and I get a big error.
Thanks, Drupal.
Why did I get this error? Because it automatically put the field tag in there for me. I didn't add that myself. When I wrote tags and add a new field, it gave that machine name. What happened is I added the field above where it says add existing field. So essentially, out of the box, Drupal comes with tags, and it's enabled. And so that means that Drupal must have created this field somewhere else, and I didn't know it, because all I did was go to basic page. But I didn't know that Drupal actually added that field already under article, because I haven't looked at article yet. So that's what happened. So that's why it works when John says it can be across multiple content types, because you add the existing field. So you're adding an existing vocabulary field that can be put on multiple content types, which brings them all together.
So does that make sense to everybody?
Is that?
So what I would like Drupal to do here is be like, oh, hey, we already have a field with this name, and I think that's the one you want. Is that the one I should use? Instead of just being like, error.
Right. So the next thing that I'm given is, now I need to make a selection of, I selected term reference, and now I can select whether I want checkboxes or radio buttons, and there's a couple other options there, okay? There's like a text field option even. But what I'm going to do is select the checkboxes and radio buttons for this example. And next, I'm going to select the vocabulary that I would like to use. And in this case, we only have one vocabulary, and it's called tags. So that's what we'll use. Now, I can see that a new field has been added to my content type. So when you open basic Drupal, you have the basic page content type with title and body, and now you've just added a third, tags. So when you go to add content, basic page, you're going to see title, you're going to see the body box, and underneath now you're going to see a list of the vocabulary that we created with all the terms, and you're going to see radio buttons, because I selected as an option that you can only select one. Okay, that was on the screen, and you would see that when you add it. And this is an example of closed tagging, because you're requiring the person to select a predetermined term.
And one, before you go off that slide, one mention here. The one at the top there, the n/a, that is a very special thing. It's kind of like, hey, none of these terms really apply. And how you get that to appear or disappear is by making this either a required field on your content type or not. So if you make it required, that n/a is not going to be there, and the user will be forced to choose one of the terms that you pre-selected. And if it's not required, then they can always say NA. Okay, so close tagging, you get your predefined list, and you have to be pretty sure, like when you're setting up your website, that all of those terms are actually going to be useful, because otherwise your users are going to revolt. So this is kind of like, an overview of the process. Right, the site creator, which is often you, come up with the list of terms. Then your site editors, hopefully you have someone to delegate content management to. Those people will then have the ability to select some from the list of terms that you've created. Okay, so that's one type of using taxonomy. Now what we're going to talk about is open tagging, or it's often called free tagging. And this is basically tagging with no limits. And anybody who's entering content and has access to the tags field is going to be able to enter whatever they want. And so for that, you would not use a radio button, right? You would give them a text field that they could type in a new tag if they wanted to. And normally we'd use an autocomplete field, so if someone else has already entered that term, it's going to suggest that and autocomplete. So this would be the workflow for that. Basically, the site creator sets this up as an autocomplete field, and then your site editors can come along and add existing terms, or select existing terms, or add new terms.
Right, and you do this essentially by using the text box, and it's the common. I should have made the slide where it said oranges, comma, and started to type beans, and then it would do a drop down and show me beans, and you could add beans onto it. So if there was a reason that you could use both terms, that would be how you'd do that. And if it didn't exist and you just hit a comma and nothing showed up and you kept typing, what this module will do is automatically add that term to the vocabulary. So you know how we manually added the terms to the vocabulary a minute ago? If you do open tagging and you select this option, all of your editors, including yourself, when you add terms, will automatically add them to the vocabulary for you. You don't have to do anything to make that happen. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay.
So now what we're going to do is give you a demonstration on open tagging. So essentially, we're going to go through the same steps to create the vocabulary on the content type. Go ahead and add the taxonomy on the content type. So we go to Manage Fields for basic page. We go to the check boxes and radio buttons button and change it to say autocomplete term widget. Okay? So that's how you can make that happen. So you can change it from the radio buttons to now open and free tagging.
So this is something to remember, often you don't touch a site for a while and you have to come back and change stuff. I would expect to find this in the settings for the vocabulary.
Right.
Where I would have an open or a closed button, but there's nothing there. You have to actually come in and change the widget on your term reference field, and that's what determines whether you add terms or not.
Yes. So now when I automatically start typing beans, there's a drop down that comes up and you can actually select beans. Okay? That's what helps people. So we talked about earlier how some people might put bean and others might put beans. So this is a way that your editors will know what's already existing in the vocabulary. Good?
It doesn't help you if the first person who typed beans put an S on.
Right.
It's kind of the first person there the next person gets
Yeah.
their suggestion. Because the first person is the person who added the term. The second person, it's just doing an autocomplete match on it. So there's no quality control here. It's just strictly about, filling stuff out.
And if you really wanted to, you can still put in the wrong one and have to.
Right.
Well, do you ever run into misspelling?
I'm sure that happens a lot.
So what do you do in that? What would
Yeah.
you recommend? Close?
So I don't have a slide for that, but I can show you that. And essentially, where I was before, where you had the list of terms, you're allowed to edit those terms. So if somebody spelled beans, B-A-E-N-S or something, you can go in and edit that specific term in the list. So to the right of it will be an edit button and change it to the correct spelling, and it will match.
And I'm assuming you can go back and fix like ones that someone else typed in correctly.
So there's a huge elephant in the room at this point. And it's just like right before the session we were talking about system administration and like who maintains your Drupal and make sure it's secure. And a lot of organizations like to pretend that that just isn't a problem, right? It's just running now and it's not a problem. In the same way, organizations like to pretend that they don't have to put any resources towards a taxonomy manager. But in reality, it's a huge job because people tag things wrong and they spell things wrong, and some people capitalize and they don't capitalize, and they
Grammar.
it is really a big part of maintaining or gardening your website. So if your administrators don't know about that, like that's a huge selling point for resources.
And I may be jumping ahead again, but how does this incorporate with the SEO when your site's live and ready to go and everything like that?
It's hugely important.
Right?
Metadata, right?
The metadata and everything, it
tags.
could be all messed up. Like if SEO happens and they're sending them to different places. Am I
If
right?
you've got misspelled terms, you'll probably get the people on Google who are typing it wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
You want those people?
No, I'm just curious because if we go back in and redo some of our taxonomy and our stuff, and how is that going to change with the SEO, with the Google and everything? Is it going to be reconfigured and fixed, or do we have to go to Google and say, hey, we fixed your taxonomy on this?
So really it depends on how you're using your taxonomy. Like we're talking here more about like the data structures and how you do it. How you expose that on your page, and we'll show you some examples a little bit further into the presentation. That's really where there's going to be a tie-in with SEO.
So just to recap really quick, I wanted to show you that these were the two options. So we went through open tagging just now and before we did closed tagging. And so essentially the same vocabulary is being used for both, but this is what your end user is going to experience. They're going to experience a list, or they're going to experience the ability to add additional terms.
And just one more comment from somebody who's been doing these for a long time. Your administrators will suggest that the solution for this is not to let people open tag. They want to have a committee meeting, and we'll just come up with a list of terms that can go into this closed tag. Run away from that. Do not allow that meeting to happen, because it's not one meeting. It's one meeting with a lot of disagreement and like 5 terms, and then it's another meeting, and then a year later you've made no progress. So just be warned.
And the other thing too, I think to think about is when you talk about usability, you have multiple audiences that are going to maybe be looking at something from multiple angles, that are going to be viewing your website. And it's important to be able to give them those terms as well as, what maybe these administrators want, right? So, for example, if you're doing research on some specific thing, you could have the scientific name of that item, and you could also have the generalized, what would people normally, really call that, right? So.
And so, I apologize for yelling at you earlier, right? When I said, no, that's not. But essentially, that's why I want to make that point. This is what you're doing to your users when you do a closed vocabulary. You're yelling at them and saying, like, you don't know the right term. When in fact, they maybe do know the right term, which is what Anne's saying. What people are searching for, that's actually a better guide than what you or your boss thinks is the best thing. All right. So, where are we? Okay. All right, so if you look at some of these tags, if you get enough tags, And the only thing you have is free tagging. You're going to start to see patterns emerging. So if you look at these tags, you can see that one of the things that we have in common here is that each of these is tagged with a color. So that's kind of a group of tags, right? And it's sitting here inside our tags vocabulary, alongside with all sorts of other stuff. So one of our we just thought of a little fun scenario here. We needed an example. So we thought, maybe you have a Drupal site that has recipes, just very basic recipes, and you tagged it with, like this. Well, what if you made something, this happens to my family sometimes, like you never really think of it ahead of time, and you sit down and you've got corn, and cornbread, and bananas, and this is all the same color. If you have gone to chef school, you would never do that. It's all about plating it out and making it attractive to the eye. So, yeah, not so good to have your meal be all one color. So what could we do? We can take all of those colors and pull them out of this big bucket of words that we have in the tags vocabulary and make another vocabulary. So that is something that really, if you're lucky, you get to think about this before the site rolls out next week. If you're not lucky, you inherited a site that does this. And then you're going to have to basically pull all those terms one by one out of the one vocabulary and put it into another vocabulary, which is painful. But the ability, the thing that tips you off that you should have another vocabulary on your content type is this commonality. And the thing that tips me off is hey, I've got all this stuff, and I want to have a view, and I want to be able to filter by this one thing. In this case, color. It's a natural thing to do, but what do we get if we do just a filter on tags? Look at this massive select list with 400 things. It's useless. So that's a tip-off point that, hey, we need to just make another vocabulary that goes alongside the tags vocabulary.
And that's where we're going to talk about multiple vocabularies. So how do you add a vocabulary? Instead of just having tags, how do I add another one? So we're going to demo that. So remember we went to structure taxonomy, and I showed you the tags vocabulary, and we went ahead and edited that vocabulary. There's a little plus with add vocabulary above vocabulary name that you can select to add a new vocabulary. And what you're going to be given is a name and description field, and you can save that. So the previous vocabulary that's already coming with Drupal is called tags. So you can come up with a new name that is yours for this new vocabulary. So for example, like we've been talking about, maybe color is the name of that vocabulary. So you can add color. So I'll let you go ahead and talk about the view.
So here's the recipes here, and we are able to, this is just a basic view that has the title of the node, and then the color, vocabulary term, and I'm just not showing tags here, right? So now I'm able to go in and do a view, do a filter, and see only the things that are orange, because I want to kind of spice up my reading plate. And what do we get? One of them, and I'll show you one of my recipes, because this is really the level of the kind of cooking that I do. It's very basic. And what we're really talking about in terms of adding vocabularies is your information architecture. And hopefully somebody is thinking about this way at the beginning, in the planning stage, before anybody ever touches the code. And if you're unfortunately, many cases, nobody thought about this, and everything sort of cobbled together, and then you've been brought in to sort of make sense of all of this stuff, because nobody can find anything. So here's just a real brief example. If you look at foods that we've been talking about, here's some things that would make sense. A free tagging field, in which case both of these things would be tagged with corn. And then maybe if you're doing some sort of website about, healthy foods or something, you might want to do, break it into different categories or types of whatever it is, in this case food. So types of food, canned versus fresh produce. Maybe you have you're crowdsourcing the availability of these different food types, and so you've got the availability with multiple select predetermined from the grocery stores that are in your area. And then, how organic is it? There's 3 different organic classifications that you can have in the US, and these are 2 of them. So this is not organically certified, and this is 100% organic. This allows me now to go to your website and quickly find out, show me all of the 100% organic food that is available at the fairway around the corner in the fresh produce section. So if you had just thrown all of these things into the tags, that's going to be very difficult to do. You could do it, but it'd be a lot of work. But with this sort of breaking different concepts into different vocabularies, this allows you to create different ways of looking through all the content on your site. And we generally call those different facets. So now we kind of like to spend a little bit of time on practical implementation. We've kind of talked about the theory. We've done some basic walkthroughs of adding vocabularies and terms. Now we'd like to talk about how does this actually work in real life? And we're just going to give a few examples from the work that we've done. So one of the things that is a little bit confusing but actually really awesome is using taxonomy as a source for menus. And it's tread carefully because menus themselves inside of Drupal are very complicated and you can do crazy things with them. We've had people who have made a menu entry for every piece of content. And you end up with these huge menus that are massive mega menus that spawn more mega menus. And one of the questions that we like to ask ourselves is, open vocabularies, closed vocabularies, they both have their place. So for us, we have, when we start each site, we sit down with a person and we have a discovery meeting, and Anne does this. She has them kind of talk about, what is this site all about? What are you trying to do? What are the big ideas that go across your site?
And there's a lot of methods for that. It's really difficult. When a client comes to us for the first time, they're generally used to the concept of a one-to-one relationship with pages on a website to your menu. So you end up getting things like mega menus that are very long, and there's one page that shows up under this category at this level, right? And the individual probably doesn't quite understand the idea that, what if that page could show up under 3 different items because you have 3 different audiences and types of people. Like, for example, we have students, we have undergraduates, we have researchers, we have prospective students looking at the site, we have potential future employees looking at the site, right? So we have a lot of audiences there. And so how they view a type of content or that page of content could be very different. And it might be tagged differently according to how those people would view that page. So how do you get someone who's stuck in this idea of one-to-one to break out and talk about categories? What I've done in the past is something called card sorting. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to talk to you about it. It's something that was talked about yesterday in the keynote a little bit. But essentially, I take no more than 60 top-level pages of content. So I'm looking at titles, menu items, anything that's really on that surface level of their site, and writing them on Post-it notes. And then I take a stack of Post-it notes into the meeting, And I ask them to just start categorizing them. By doing that, saying, as soon as you find something in the stack that belongs with something else, put it in that pile. And so we make these piles. Then I ask them to label the piles. If you had to give it a term, what would that be? And so they can label that pile, and all of a sudden, what happens as they get going is someone says, well, but that could go over here as well. And I'll say, don't worry about that. That's okay. Put it where you think it most likely goes, and write it on another post-it note and put it over there, right? And they just kind of keep going. Then, once they have those titles done, ta-da, we have our first closed vocabulary. Okay? It gets them started. It gets them looking at their content as if someone who was visiting the site was searching for their content.
So we take that and turn it into a closed vocabulary. So this site is the crops knowledge base at Iowa State. And there's lots and lots of content here, a couple different content types. But one thing that is the same about all the content is it is somehow related to crops. So naturally, what are the closed terms that we would use here? They would be different, big ideas about things that pertain to crops. So it's either a production problem or insects and mites, pesticides, plant diseases, soils, or weeds. So as the content goes in, it's required that the content person choose which bucket does this go into. Okay? So by doing that, we have then a facet that allows us to search later. So if we see the add screen here.
Just click something? Or would you like me to add a page? Okay.
So what we do for our Drupal platform is we heavily leverage Solar, which is a search engine. And so we take all of these things and we use both the categories and the free tagging, because every piece of content just has open tagging for whatever people want to tag it with. And you can see here that we've landed on a search page, and we can now enter a search term, and we can facet down by these things. We can see just the plant diseases, which is currently selected. So we could see, say, the forage pieces of content that are within plant diseases.
And then these are also clickable as well.
So the tags are there, and you can continue to filter down on a tag. So if you want to see just the things that are selected that are tagged with a certain tag. So it gives people, because multiple people, multiple ways of interacting with the content.
Distinguish these categories.
So category is the closed vocabulary. Okay, it must choose some category for the content to go in. If it goes nowhere, that means that it's either wrong for the site, or we have a category that needs to be created.
And we don't allow our editors to create those categories unless they're really well trained. We'll add them. We'll ask them to have us to add the category. And once they start asking us a lot and we find that the categories they're adding are legitimate terms, then we'll probably train them and help them add them.
So this is an additional vocabulary. Remember we talked about how you can add different vocabularies that make sense for the site? Crop is an additional vocabulary here.
So I'm just...
I saw on one of your, just scroll down.
Yeah, you have multiple categories. So it's required at least one category for your site, but they can have, once they do the one, they can.
Yeah, so if we were going to add content, so if you're going to add a basic page to...
Yeah, okay.
If you're going to add a page to a site, to this crop site, what you're going to see is a title, and then you're going to see a category. So this is a closed vocabulary, and it's required. And this is a closed vocabulary crops that's not required, but is encouraged. So you can select one of those as well. You can also select multiple categories. So I can hold Command down and I can select multiple categories if it fits in multiple places. And the tagging, this tags, is just exactly what we talked about. This is the default tags, essentially, and vocabulary that's open tagging, free tagging, where your clients can just add a few words. And it is required. We require at least one word.
And it's useful for a couple things. One is SEO, as you alluded to earlier. And the other thing is facets, like we just saw. But we use it for a third thing as well, which is the site index. So if you go down to the site index, so this is, you can go through all of the tags here by letter. So if there's something specific that you're looking for that you can't find, you might find it in the site index. And this is also a helpful place for the taxonomy manager to scan through and be like, oh, these two terms should be lumped together, or this is spelled wrong.
Another thing that we allow is this, we've added the ability to back out. So you're backing out of a term. So I chose green snap from the site index, but then I see, oh, there's other things that I'm interested in, and how about we just take that out of the scenario? Oh, I'm sorry. I have to select something else. That's what I was trying to do. So now I'm going to also select crop production. This probably isn't a good example because there's not as many. But I could decide to back out of green snap and just look at the crop production items, right? So if I back out of green snap, now I have a lot more options to choose from, and then I can continue to filter. So it allows, just like we were talking about yesterday morning in usability, it allows the visitor to your site to be able to continue viewing the content and not necessarily have a need or feel like they should click that back button, right?
Yeah, it's like an exploratory interface.
Yes, it's very interactive.
Okay, so I think we're just out of time here. So I wanted to just really briefly talk about the future of taxonomy as Drupal 8 comes up. Because you want to make sure that the stuff you do is going to translate into the next version of Drupal 8, right?
Oops.
And it turns out that as of Drupal 8 Beta 10, the taxonomy term reference field, which is what we've just been telling you to use, is actually going away.
Thank you very much.
However, it sounds scary, but really it's not. Because what has happened is taxonomy was one of the first things in Drupal. It was written back in like 2002 by some Italian guy, and he really got it right. Like, it's been basically unchanged all these years because he did a really good job. But all these years later, the rest of Drupal has kind of grown up besides the taxonomy. So we now have fields. We didn't have fields before. The fields can have, like, terms that you can attach to them. And then we have entities now, where everything is like a full object inside of Drupal. It didn't used to be that way. Taxonomy used to be very special. So what's really happening here is that that the rest of Drupal has matured enough that the implementation of taxonomy is just being re-implemented on the new core stuff. Your user interface, your functionality, all of that stuff is completely unchanged. So taxonomy has been around so long, and it's such an important part of core that there will be an upgrade path from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, no question. So even if you see scary things like this, like, don't worry about it. Taxonomy will be with you a long, long time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I hope that you all come to the sprint. If you're able to, you weren't sure, or maybe you're on the fence, I would highly encourage you to come to the sprint. I have been one of those people that didn't know how to get involved or contribute, right? You can contribute back to Drupal by testing and just by being interested, essentially. And there are going to be people there that can help you get set up if you'd like to learn how you can help continue moving Drupal forward. Okay? So don't be scared or worried if you hear this big scary word called sprint. Show up, because it's well worth it. All right.
Just reading through it.
Thank you.